PJNet.TV. It is 9 p.m. East Coast time in the United States, and as you can tell, our bumper's running, but I'll tell you this ahead of time. We have a first-time guest standing by in our green room. Our chat room is waiting. We are recording. We are streaming. Let's start a countdown to Studio 8, starting now. Well, good evening and welcome to this, a brand new week as spring has begun now officially. And we are starting a new week out as best as I know how to do it. It's a first-time guest, and we're always thrilled to have a first-time guest, almost as much as we are thrilled when a first-time guest comes back to be a second-time guest. Anyway, so we bring you Heather, who is standing by in our green room. So let me introduce to the big screen here at pjnet.tv, Heather Norman Smith, who we will probably just call Heather. But Heather, this is a great time of the year. It's a great time to be alive. We're recovering from COVID. You are one of the younger people that we've had. You would classify as a young person on our program. You've got a lot of years ahead of you, hopefully, in ministry, but already, you have spent quite a bit of time in ministry because, after all, you're a preacher's kid.
That's right, Mark. All my life.
Was that a hardship? Was that tough?
Well, it certainly comes with some unique things, but no, I wouldn't call it a hardship. I call it a blessing. I feel very blessed to have had my dad be my pastor all my life and continued in the same church since I was 2 years old. So I'm very, very pleased that God saw that path for my life.
Well, you grew up in the church. Now, your father was the pastor at the same church all this time?
All this time, yeah.
Do you know how unusual that is?
Yeah, I hear that it's very unusual.
Yeah, pastors are like coaches. They welcome them in with a red carpet, and then 3 years later they're running them off. But because you made the changes they wanted you to, but you didn't have to deal with moving a lot, which, fortunately that had probably a stabilizing effect as you grew up. But then you get out of school, you start working, and then you meet what turns out to be now you're a pastor's wife. But it hadn't always been that way. Maybe,
right.
Kind of.
We talked earlier that my husband serves in our church too, in our small congregation as our youth pastor. And but that's obviously God had a plan there too, but he wasn't a believer when we met. So I have been privileged to see him grow in the Lord and then eventually answer the call to preach as well. So obviously God had that planned out long before I knew what was happening.
So how many churches has he pastored at?
So he's never had a full-time pastorship, but he has been the youth pastor at our congregation for a few years now.
Okay, continuously. Well, that's amazing. Do you know how much of a revolving door is typically the case? I mean, and that can be very disruptive because you also have a family. Tell us about your family.
Yes, we have 4 kids, and the oldest will be 15 in a couple weeks. And then, so our oldest daughter's 15, our 11-year-old daughter there, and then we have a 9-year-old son and a 5-year-old son. They keep us busy.
Now, of course, all children are special, but your youngest is even more special, or special in a different kind of way.
In a different way, for sure, yeah. So we had the dream, I think, to foster for a long time. We kind of had envisioned what our family would look like early on, and so we had the 2 girls, and thought, okay, now we're going to look into foster care when the girls are a little older. And then our son came along, our 3rd biological child, and we said, okay, I guess we're going to have 3 kids and then adopt, or foster to adopt. So that's the way it worked out. And I had this idea in my mind that, we would wait until Daniel was our son Daniel was 7, and we would adopt around a 3-year old. That was my plan. That was just what I was
Hmm.
thinking would happen. And God delivered exactly that. That's exactly what happened. So Benjamin came to us from foster care when he was 2.5, and that was in May of 2019. And then he legally became our son in July of 2020. So we had a COVID adoption ceremony. We had a virtual ceremony, and it was very special. So that was that picture that you have there. That's the day of his adoption.
Now, Heather, you mentioned that this was something that you and your husband wanted to do. I'm curious, not many people want to do that.
Well, I think when you ask the Lord to order your steps, He's going to give you those callings. And so that was we prayed about our life and what it should, what step we should take in ministry and just serving. And this was a burden, and so it was a strong burden, and it's one that once you have you don't rest well, until you fulfill it. There's always that burning that there's something I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not doing. And so when Benjamin was adopted, it was a feeling of peace for me that I'd done what God wanted me to do. He had a plan for my life. And obviously there's lots more things hopefully that he wants me to do. But for that particular thing on my list that I think God called me to, from the beginning of time, he just had that plan for us. And so he was faithful to carry it out.
Okay, so that's been a burden on your heart long before you were bearing children and all that, right?
Yes, I don't know exactly when I started to feel that way. But definitely when my husband and I first got married, 16 years ago, we didn't really have this long, drawn out conversation about, one day we should do this. And it was just understood, between the
Hmm.
both of us that that's what's going to happen. So
Okay, because I was going to ask when did you let your husband in on this dream, but it just kind of organically fused, so to speak.
it did. He always kind of had that idea too. He loves children. He's working with youth and ministry. He loves children. Um, he envisioned it happening a little bit differently. He just had this feeling that there was a child going to show up that needed us, and then we would go from there. Where I felt more drawn to seeking out foster care
Hmm.
license. And so when I talked to him I said, I think it's time to go talk to the children's home, and go through that process. And so he agreed, still thinking, well, I want to do this, but maybe a different path. But we went, we sat down with the licensing agency for a preliminary visit, about 45-minute conversation. They handed us this stack of paperwork and said, if you're interested in going through our classes, fill this out and bring it back. And on the way to the car, he said, so you're going to fill those out today? So he was on board right away, that this is what we were supposed to do. So it worked out very, very well.
Now, it's easy to understand. I mean, this is a complex topic,
Mm-hmm.
fostering, adopting, and yeah, all that stuff. We adults can process that, and it sounds like you and your husband were on the same track. But now, but you've got some children that maybe they're not able to quite understand it at the level that you and your husband do.
Right.
How did you bring them into the picture, or did you? I mean,
Well, that was definitely a concern, and we were very open with all three of our kids going into the process. We tried to prepare them as much as possible for whatever outcome there was to our foster care journey, and they were remarkable. They were excited from the beginning. So and of course there've been challenges, but I'm so proud of how my children handled everything from us being gone in the evenings to go to classes, from the very beginning, to waiting on a placement to eventually adopting Benjamin. But actually, there were times during the actual fostering where I would be very stressed, very overwhelmed, just. because of a lot of the challenges that come with foster care. And it would be my kids who they were dealing with it so well that I thought I knew, okay, we're doing the right thing, because if they had not handled it as well as they did, it would have made it a lot harder on me. So I was very grateful for them.
I have I haven't heard that many, but a lot of times when the topic of foster children, foster parenting, foster care, I hear horror stories of a broken system and broken lives. What's been your experience?
Um, that's true. Our experience with foster care was fairly limited in the fact that we only had one other placement besides our son, and we knew that was going to be very short term. So we had a child that came to us for a 6-day period, and that was it was very rewarding to be there for him those 6 days. It was a unique situation, and we just fell in love with him right away, and it was sad to see him go, but we knew he was going to a great situation. But with Benjamin, when he came to us, like I said, God had a plan. God had him in mind for us all along, because he'd been in care for a very long time. Yet, when he came to us, he was almost at the point of being eligible to adopt. But I say all that to say that, we were licensed 8 months before we had Benjamin come to us. Mm-hmm. And I was very surprised by that, because I thought, the need is so great. Why are they not giving us children that we could help? But obviously God had a plan. So Benjamin was our only, long-term placement. So I think we were spared a lot of the difficulty of, we just didn't have as much exposure to some of the things in the system. But definitely with his case too, there were challenges, and I do think, a lot of reform. I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I think anybody who has been around foster care system can tell you that there's reforms needed in lots of areas.
Now, how old was Benjamin when he came into your life?
He was 2.5.
Okay, so I guess that's a good thing, because he hadn't had time to accumulate some of those horror stories. So was his adjustment normal?
He adjusted very, very well and very quickly, and he was calling us mommy and daddy, by the following day. Of course, that's what he was hearing our other kids say. And the adjustment period was, he was hours. He was hours from that first day, and the adjustment went well. But, we don't know, even though he'd been in foster care for most of his life up to that point, we don't know exactly everything that he experienced. But we do know there were situations that he experienced as an infant that definitely led to some trauma.
Yeah. Well, the circumstances of being placed in the foster care system are never good.
Exactly.
So it adds some extra requirements to parenting. We adopted our child, and I myself was adopted, and my conclusion is, if all parents had to go through the grilling that my wife and I had to go through to qualify, there would be a lot less children.
Yeah. That's a good point. We understand certainly how careful they have to be, but a lot of people, I think, have this misconception that they're just, that it's easy because the need is great, but there are a lot of requirements that shouldn't discourage anybody from trying. I don't want to do that. But yeah, that was stressful. That was very, very stressful, having to meet all the requirements and all the meetings, and you feel like you're under constant scrutiny.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Really?
Yes, I do know.
So.
And, we live near a state line, and when we adopted, you first have custody. The adoption is not, the legal process takes time.
Right.
And I would literally have to notify the adoption agency when we were going to another state.
Mm-hmm.
with the child. I didn't have to get permission, but I had to notify them. And then when we
Mm-hmm.
came back, I had to notify them that we were back in the state. Just, it's like, well, gee, I'm a grown up kid.
Right. I
But
think one of the sweetest things for me after his adoption was final was if he had a mild fever or something, being able to give him medicine and not write it down. Because, having to track, every single dose of medicine that you give him and that kind of thing, even though he felt so much like my son, he at that point, when foster care legally wasn't. And so
mhm,
the record keeping that you have to do and everything. And so after his adoption was final and realizing he needs Tylenol and I don't have to write it down and tell anybody, that
yay,
was kind of nice.
the things we take for granted,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, there may be people out there that are considering possibly adoption, possibly fostering, possibly being a guardian ad litem. I don't know how it
Mm-hmm.
works in your state,
Yes.
but all three of those are stepping into the lives of, well, let's, at the risk of sounding crude or candid, just a stranger, okay, that is
Mm-hmm.
brought into your life. What would you call? Is there any cautions you would give them or encouragement that you would give someone thinking about it, but just needs to hear from somebody?
Well, I believe fully that God equips us for what he calls us to do. So, number one, trust the Lord. If you feel like this is something you're supposed to do, it really doesn't matter how stressful it is or how difficult it is. If God calls you to it, then he's going to equip you to do it. And you'll succeed in that. And certainly pray, obviously pray about it, and to make sure that that's his path for you. But I would just like to say that this is what we're called to do as believers. I mean, I think the Bible is pretty clear about the believer's responsibility for the orphans and the widows.
Mm.
And sometimes I feel like it's an overlooked commandment
Hmm.
within the church. So
Conveniently overlooked. Yeah.
yeah. So
Well, I'm glad you shared that. We used up more time than I wanted. We've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left. We can go a little extra if we need to. But I wanted to point out that, well, first of all, you do have this book, and not only this book, you have others. But
mhm.
before I bring that on the screen, you write more than books, Heather.
Mhm. So I write Christian fiction, but I also do enjoy. Well, I think I know what you were going to say, Mark. But I write devotionals. I have a blog where a lot of times I'll share things that are on my heart, and I think of that as a devotion blog. But I did share with you earlier that throughout the years I've written some songs too. So I think that's probably where you were going with that.
Yeah.
I do like to write songs.
And folks, those of you who are watching this program in the pjnet.tv chat room, I think Barbara's going to be playing that one of those videos or maybe more between the programs. If you're not watching this in the pjnet.tv chat room, well, shame on you. You're doing it wrong. Go over to pjnet.tv, click that first button with your desktop, laptop, or even tablet, and enjoy the fellowship over there. And we'll probably get to hear. But okay, so let's come in for a landing. You have, in fact, well, you've written more than one book, but your most recent one
Hmm.
has an interesting name, especially for us Southern Baptists, because we don't do the alcohol thing, right?
Right.
But
Right.
but wherever you find four Baptists, you'll find a fifth. Anyway, the title is.
That's great.
It's true. New Wine Transportation Company. Gosh, that brings a lot of images to mind. This is a fiction book. Now, hey, before you tell us about the book, please
Hmm.
reiterate what we talked about earlier. When you write fiction, you are a Christian, you are an author, you're writing fiction. But, folks, there's a lot of Christian writers of fiction that don't write Christian fiction. They just write, well, clean fiction. And there is an important distinction, isn't there?
I think so. I mean, people have their own categories for what they write, and that's okay. But my definition, my personal definition, with being a Christian fiction author, is making sure that there's a clear gospel message in every story. Um,
Amen.
That's very important to me, and it's actually very motivating. If I get into a writing slump, if I'm not really sure where the story's going, I can just circle back and think about the spiritual aspect, and how do I want to communicate the gospel to my reader through this story. And so, in some stories it's stronger than others, and some stories it's more clear than others, but it's always going to be there, and that's very important to me. That message of hope, that message of the gospel, of just believing and accepting Christ for my characters in some way, is present in every story that I
Hmm.
write.
I was going to ask you, give me an example of a plot twist or whatever, but just having a scene in the story that happens to be at a church, that wouldn't qualify, would it? You need something a little stronger.
Right. I mean, I've read books where maybe the character is in trouble and they say a prayer,
Yeah.
and or they visit, or maybe they reference that they like a certain hymn, and like I said, that's great. Those are wonderful things, and if that's what somebody feels led to, that their writing should be like, that is great. But for me, I really do try to make sure that there's going to be a character somewhere who has an encounter that changes them dramatically, and draws them. It could be a believer that they realize that they need to turn to the Lord more in this area or that area. Just that, we could even take these fictional characters and their experiences and apply the lessons that they learn. We can apply those to our own lives. But I think it's done in a way that it's woven into the story, and you don't feel like it's me, telling you what you should believe or what you should
Hmm.
think. It's the character situation that really brings home those truths, um, and that I hope people will get.
Excellent, Heather. That I commend you. I really do, because Jesus, by the way, told fictional stories. I don't know
Yes.
why we call them parables. That must be some special designation of only Jesus told parables. I guess I
Yeah.
don't know. But your point is well taken. The story, you're not using the words to preach at, but it's
Right.
drawn into the storyline in a way that people can see similarity, so they can relate to it, and see that it was a spiritual answer that delivers us. Because every story has to have conflict. I mean, yeah,
Right.
no conflict, no story. That's what I've been told. That's what I learned at all these writing conferences that I attended, which I wasn't
You're
there to attend. But
you're right.
anyway, all right. Well, Heather, listen, you've got a wonderful ministry that you're involved in, not only with your husband, but in your family and your father, with your foster care, with your parenting, and also with your devotional writings. Forgot to mention, you also, by the way, she blogs too. Let me She has a website. I forgot to put that up there earlier. Oddly named heathernormansmith.com. Don't know where you came up with that, but maybe it was everything else you wanted was taken. So, but that is the website, and all of her work can be found there, as well as her videos of some of her music composition that he's done. But Heather, you have blessed. You've blessed your family. You've blessed your ministry is a blessing, but you have blessed us just sharing it with us here tonight, and we appreciate you doing that. And we hope that you'll feel that the door's always open. We'll keep the light on for you. If God is doing something new in your life, I hope you'll come back and share that with us too.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Glad to do it, Heather. Wow, what a powerful message. And it's not over. As good as that was, it's not over. In just a few moments, not long from now, Casper Stockham will join us, as he does every Monday night. And until then, I've got some work that I need to do to get ready for him. But here's the homework for you, if you don't mind doing this. Ask yourself these two questions. What is the boldest thing that you've ever done for Jesus Christ? Second question is, well, when was that? And the challenge is to never be satisfied. with either answer.